The stars themselves seemed to be dying. One by one, their light vanished behind an endless tide of darkness. High Curator Nesson stood motionless in the heart of the last operational communications hub on Villia Prime. Before him, a massive holographic star map flickered as another colony world disappeared. A bright blue light. Blink. Gone. No explosion. No distress signal. Just silence. The Kragoth swarm had consumed 14 planets in less than 3 months. Entire civilizations had vanished without leaving behind a single survivor. Now, only one world remained, Villia Prime, and according to the latest sensor reports, the swarm was already entering the system. The countdown had begun. Hours, not days, hours. The vast chamber was eerily quiet. Hundreds of communication specialists worked in silence, each one understanding that this could be the final task of their lives. Nesson took a slow breath. His face remained calm, but his hands betrayed him, trembling ever so slightly. He looked around the room. These were not soldiers. They were scholars, artists, scientists, historians, a civilization that had spent 10,000 years creating beauty instead of preparing for war. We believed knowledge would always triumph over violence, Nesson whispered. We were wrong. He turned toward the communications team. Send the signal. The technicians immediately went to work. Their long, graceful fingers danced across glowing control panels with incredible precision. Power surged through the ancient transmitters. Tower after tower awakened across the planet. Massive antenna arrays rotated toward the stars. The emergency beacon was ready. Unlike most civilizations, the Villians had never built fleets, never forged weapons, never developed armies. Why would they? For 10 millennia, diplomacy had solved every conflict they had ever faced. Peace had become part of their identity. Until the Kragoth arrived. The swarm did not negotiate. It did not conquer. It consumed. Worlds, cities, people, everything, leaving behind only empty planets drifting through space. Nesson watched as the final version of the message appeared before him. Every word had been carefully chosen. Every symbol translated into the universal mathematical language, the one language every spacefaring civilization understood regardless of biology, culture, or speech. There were no threats, no demands, only one desperate request. We seek sanctuary, we seek safety, we seek anyone willing to answer. The beacon was transmitted. It burst from Villia Prime in every direction, racing across the stars at faster-than-light speeds. Toward allies, toward strangers, toward civilizations that had never even heard the name Villian. The signal carried only one message. Please, help us. For several long moments, nothing happened. The room remained silent. No replies, no acknowledgements, no hope. Then, a young technician suddenly looked up from her console. Her eyes widened. High Curator. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I'm receiving a response. Every head in the chamber turned toward her. Nesson stepped forward. Who is it? The technician stared at the transmission in disbelief. I don't recognize the identification code. She quickly searched the galactic registry. Nothing. No match. No civilization on record uses this signal. Nesson's heart sank. An unknown species. That could mean pirates, raiders, or something even worse. The technician slowly opened the message. Only a single sentence appeared on the screen. This is the Human Defense Fleet. A pause. Then another line appeared. Hold your position. The room fell completely silent. One final sentence appeared. And for the first time in weeks, hope returned. Help is already on the way. It asked for diplomatic help and wisdom. It included the coordinates of their dying world and emphasized their commitment to peace and nonviolence. The Vians believed that somewhere in the galaxy, someone would hear their cry and offer them refuge, or perhaps negotiate with the Krago on their behalf. The signal traveled through space at faster-than-light speeds, reaching 30 different sectors. Most of them belonged to species the Vians knew, but one signal went farther than intended, slipping through a navigation error into a region marked as restricted in the Galactic Council's databases. It reached Earth. The planet was classified as a Class 12 death world. It was home to a species the Council had quietly observed but never contacted. Humans were considered too dangerous, too aggressive, too unpredictable. Their world was a nightmare of extreme weather, hostile predators, and diseases that could kill most known species within hours. Yet somehow, impossibly, humans had not just survived, but thrived. The Council had decided long ago that humanity should remain isolated. They were a problem to be contained, not a civilization to be welcomed. But the Villians didn't know any of this, and their signal had been received. Dr. Sun Ho sat in his cramped office at the Global Communications Array, staring at the message that had appeared on his screen 3 hours ago. He was a xenolinguist, an expert in alien languages and communication patterns. Earth had been listening to the galaxy for decades, quietly learning, never announcing their presence. This was the first time anyone had sent a message directly toward them. He had spent those 3 hours decoding it, running it through translation algorithms, checking and rechecking his work. The message was clear enough. A species called the Velion was under attack. They were dying. They needed help, but something about the translation bothered him. The mathematical language was precise, but context mattered. The Vians used phrases that translated oddly into human concepts. Where they wrote about sanctuary, the human interpretation came out closer to defensive position. Where they asked for diplomatic wisdom, it read more like strategic assistance. Sung Ho knew he might be wrong. The cultural gap between species was enormous, but his gut told him these people weren't just asking for a place to hide. They were begging for someone to fight for them. He picked up his phone and called the only number he had for military command. Admiral Tae Jin was in a strategy meeting when his secure line buzzed. He was a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many conflicts. He had commanded the Earth Defense Fleet for 12 years, preparing for threats that had never come until now. "Sir, we have a situation." Sung Ho's voice crackled through the speaker. "We received an alien distress signal. They're under attack by something called the Krago Swarm. They're asking for help." Tai Jin felt his pulse quicken. "How certain are you about this?" "Very certain, sir. The signal is authentic. I've verified it 6 times. These people are dying, and they reached out to us specifically, to Earth specifically." Tae-jun asked. There was a pause. "I think it was an accident, sir. But yes, we received it. And based on the translation, I believe they need military intervention, not just shelter." Qin-jin ended the call and looked at the officers around the conference table. They had all heard the conversation. Captain Huan, his best fighter wing commander, was already standing. "How fast can we mobilize?" Qin asked. Commander Hun pulled up tactical displays. 18 hours for a full battle group. 73 ships. "We can have more if we wait another day." "We don't have another day," Tae-jin said. He looked at the star charts, calculating distances. "If these villi are dying as fast as the signal suggests, every hour matters, sir." Lieutenant Yuna spoke up from her station. "We don't know what we're flying into. This could be a trap, or worse, it could start a war with species we don't understand." Tae-jun nodded slowly. She was right to be cautious, but he had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. Humanity had been alone in the galaxy, watching from the shadows, building weapons and warships for threats that existed only in simulations. Now, someone had called for help. Maybe they had called the wrong species. Maybe they had no idea what kind of force they were summoning, but they had called, and Qin could not ignore that. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "Battle stations in 12 hours. We launch in 18. Full combat loadout." The room erupted into activity. Officers rushed to their stations, calling their departments, initiating launch sequences that hadn't been used outside of drills. Captain Haiwan approached Tae-jin as the others dispersed. "Sir, do you really think they want us to fight for them?" "I think they're dying and desperate," Tae-jin replied. "Whether they want warriors or diplomats doesn't matter. They asked for help, and we're the only ones who heard them. The galaxy doesn't know what we are," Haiwan said quietly. "They don't know what we're capable of." Tae-jin looked at her with cold certainty. "Then they're about to learn." Across Earth, military bases came alive. The defense fleet had been humanity's secret project for decades. Built in orbital shipyards hidden behind the moon. 73 warships, each designed for combat scenarios the peaceful galaxy had never imagined. They carried weapons that violated treaties Earth had never signed. railguns that could punch through asteroids, nuclear missiles banned by civilizations who found them barbaric, and other things, darker things that waited in sealed armories. In the command center, Sung Ho watched the preparations through the video feeds. He felt a cold weight in his stomach. He had translated the message as best he could. But what if he was wrong? What if the villains really were asking for sanctuary, not salvation through violence? He thought about calling Tae-jin back, urging caution. But then he looked at the final part of the villain message. It was a simple phrase in the mathematical language. "We are ending, please remember us." No, Sung Ho thought. These people didn't want to be remembered, they wanted to live. The fleet would launch in 18 hours, and the galaxy would never be the same. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Vayan system. And what they saw made even the veterans fall silent. Admiral Tae-jin stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, his flagship, watching the holographic display update with sensor data. 14 worlds all marked in red, dead or dying. The Kragoth swarm covered the system like a disease. Thousands of bioships, pulsing with sickly light as they consumed everything in their path. "Mother of God," Lieutenant Yuna whispered from her weapon station. The Krago ships were unlike anything in the human military database. They were organic grown, rather than built. Each one looked like a twisted combination of insect and deep-sea creature, covered in chitinous armor and trailing tentacles that glowed with bioluminescence. The smallest were the size of fighter jets. The largest dwarfed Earth's biggest battleships, and there were thousands of them. "Scan results coming in," Commander Hyan reported, his voice steady despite what they were seeing. Krath fleet composition, approximately 4,000 individual ships. No metal, no technology as we understand it. Everything is biological. They're feeding on the planetary populations. "Show me the Valian forces," Tae-jin ordered. The display shifted, highlighting the friendly ships. What was left of the Vivelian defense fleet hung in space near their final world, Velia Prime. There were perhaps 50 ships, and they were beautiful in their own way. Elegant curves, artistic designs built for exploration and wonder, not war. They were being systematically torn apart by the swarm. As Ton watched, Ion Cruiser tried to escape. 3 Krago ships chased it down, latching onto its hull with those horrible tentacles, cutting through the armor like it was paper. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," an Mara called out from communications. "It's from the Vian command ship, audio only. Put it through." A voice filled the bridge, speaking in the same mathematical language from the distress signal. The translation came through a moment later, processed by Sun Ho's algorithms back on Earth. "Unknown vessels. This is High Curator Nesson, of the Villian Consortium. We did not expect anyone to answer our call. Please, if you value life, do not approach. The Kragoth will consume you as they have consumed us. Save yourselves. At least someone will survive to remember our civilization." Chin-jin picked up the communicator. "Hi, Curator Nesson. This is Admiral Tin, of the Earth Defense Fleet. We received your distress signal. We're here to help." There was a long pause. "Earth? We have no record of Earth in our databases. Where do you come from?" "That's a long story," Tae-jun replied. "Right now, you need to get your people to safety. Pull back to Vilia Prime and protect the civilian evacuation. We'll handle the swarm." Another pause longer this time. "You don't understand. There are thousands of them. Our weapons barely scratch their armor. They adapt to everything we try. You cannot fight them. No one can." "You've never seen us fight," Tae-jun said quietly. He nodded to Yuna. "Cut transmission. All ships, battle formation Delta 7. Captain Huan, launch all fighters. Commander Hyan, target the nearest concentration of enemy ships. Let's show these things what a death world breeds." The human fleet moved with a precision that would have shocked the Vians if they had been watching their sensors. 73 warships spread into an attack formation, each one taking a predetermined position. From the carrier ships, wings of fighters poured out like angry hornets. Captain Huan sat in the cockpit of her fighter, running through her pre-combat checklist. Behind her, 200 other pilots did the same. They were the best Earth had to offer, trained in simulators that assumed every enemy was faster, stronger, and meaner than they were. All wings. "This is Haiwan," she said over the squadron channel. "Rules of engagement are simple. There are no rules. These things eat people. We're going to kill every single one of them. Stay tight. Watch your wingman, and remember your training." Today we show the galaxy what humans do to monsters. The fighter wings accelerated toward the swarm. The Kaguth didn't react at first. They had never encountered resistance like this. Every species they had consumed had tried to talk first, negotiate, find a peaceful solution. Humans didn't bother. The first salvo came from the capital ships. Railguns fired solid slugs accelerated to a fraction of light speed. The projectiles hit the Krago bioships with the force of nuclear weapons. Armor that had resisted Vayan energy weapons shattered like glass. Ships that had seemed indestructible exploded in clouds of frozen biomatter. Direct hits across the board, Yuna reported, her voice carrying a note of savage satisfaction. Enemy casualties, 114 confirmed kills. But the swarm was already reacting. Thousands of ships turned toward the human fleet. Tentacles writhing, bioweapons charging with sickly green light. "Here they come," Jan said. "All ships evasive pattern Gamma. Return fire at will." The space between the fleets lit up with weapons fire. The Krago launched organic missiles that tracked their targets with predatory intelligence. The humans answered with nuclear-tipped torpedoes that the Vians would have considered war crimes. The Krago's fighter wing hit the swarm like a knife. Her pilots used tactics that made no sense to the hive mind. They flew chaotically, unpredictably, exploiting the tiny gaps in the swarm's coordination. Where the Krago expected patterns, humans gave them creative chaos. "This is J1, her second-in-command called over the radio. "I've got 6 on my tail. Someone want to clean them up?" "On it," another pilot responded. "Brake left on 3. 1, 2, 3. Jawan's fighter spun into a turn that would have killed most organic species from the G-forces alone. The Krago ships following him flew straight into a firing solution. They didn't survive. On the Indomitable, Tyan watched the tactical display with cold satisfaction. The humans were outnumbered 6-1, but they were winning. Every doctrine, every strategy, every weapon they had developed in isolation was proving devastatingly effective. "Sir, the Craig author calling for reinforcements," Hyan reported. "Sensors show approximately 3,000 more ships entering the system from 2 adjacent sectors." Tujin smiled grimly. "Good. Now we don't have to hunt them down. All ships continue engagement. Lieutenant Yuna authorized use of antimatter weapons. Let's end this quickly." Yuna hesitated for just a moment. Antimatter was the ultimate taboo weapon in human warfare, used only in the most desperate circumstances. But these weren't humans they were fighting. These were monsters that ate entire civilizations. She entered the authorization codes. Deep in the Indomitable's weapons bays, magnetic containment fields shifted. Antimatter warheads, each one capable of destroying a city, loaded into torpedo tubes. "Antimatter weapons armed and ready," Yuna reported. "Fire," Chin ordered. The torpedoes streak across space, targeting the largest Kragoth ships. When they hit, matter and antimatter annihilated each other in bursts of pure energy. The explosions were so bright they could be seen from the surface of Vaya Prime. On the Vayan command ship, High Curator Nessun watched in stunned horror as the unknown human fleet tore through the Kragoth swarm like they were nothing. These humans fought with a brutality that defied everything he knew about spacefaring civilizations. They used weapons that were banned by every galactic treaty. They showed no hesitation, no mercy, no fear, and they were protecting the Villians. "What are they?" his second-in-command whispered. Nessun didn't have an answer. He only knew one thing with certainty. The Villians had sent out a call for help, and something had answered. Something terrifying and violent, and absolutely unstoppable. "Get our evacuation ships moving," Nessun ordered. "While these humans are giving us time, we need to save as many people as we can." The battle raged on, and the galaxy began to learn what humanity was capable of. The battle had been raging for 14 hours straight, and the human fleet showed no signs of stopping. High Curator Nessun stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the tactical displays with growing disbelief. The Valians had fought the Krago for 3 months and barely slowed them down. The humans had arrived 6 hours ago and had already destroyed over half the swarm. But it was the way they fought that truly shocked him. There were no pauses for negotiations, no attempts at communication with the enemy, no careful positioning or strategic withdrawal. The humans simply attacked with overwhelming violence, using weapons and tactics that made Nessun's blood run cold. "They're not fighting a war," his tactical officer said quietly. "They're conducting an extermination." A young Vian communications officer approached Nessun nervously. "High Curator, The human admiral is requesting permission to dock a shuttle with our ship. He says he wants to coordinate evacuation efforts. Nesson felt his heart skip a beat. After watching what these humans could do, the thought of having them aboard his ship was terrifying. But they had saved his people. He could not refuse. Grant them permission, Nesson said, and prepare a greeting party. These humans deserve our respect, even if they frighten us. 20 minutes later, Admiral Tae Jin stepped through the airlock onto the Villian command ship, accompanied by Dr. San Ho and 2 armed guards. The guards were there purely for protocol, but their presence made several Vians step back nervously. Nesson approached slowly, studying the humans. They were shorter than Vian, but more heavily built, with a compact muscularity that suggested strength. Chin's face was lined with age and stress, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Admiral Chin," Nesson said through the translation device. "I am High Curator Nesson. On behalf of the Velian Consortium, I thank you for your aid. You have saved billions of lives." Chin nodded respectfully. "We came as soon as we received your distress signal. I'm sorry we couldn't arrive sooner." "Your timing was perfect," Nesson replied. "But I must ask, where does Earth lie? Why have we never heard of your people?" "That's complicated," Taejin said. "Right now, we need to focus on getting your civilians to safety. How many people are left on Velia Prime?" 6 billion in the underground shelters, Nesson answered. "But our evacuation ships can only carry a fraction of that number. We had hoped to negotiate with the Kragoth, find some way to coexist, but they won't communicate. They only consume," Dr. Sangho spoke up. "Hi, Curator. With your permission, I'd like to work with your scientists. We need to understand the K-biology, find weaknesses we can exploit." Nesson gestured to his science officer. "Of course, any help you can provide would be valuable." As Sung Ho left with the Vian scientists, Taejin pulled up a holographic display showing the current battle situation. "The Krago reinforcements are arriving faster than we anticipated. We've destroyed about 2,000 of their ships, but another 3,000 just entered the system. Then we should retreat while we can." Nesson said, "You've done enough. Save your own people." Tin looked at him with an expression Nesson couldn't quite read. "We don't retreat, not when there are still people to protect. But I need your help to understand what we're fighting." They spent the next hour sharing data. Nesson explained everything the Villians had learned about the Krago. Over 3 months of desperate fighting, the swarm was a hive mind, controlled by larger ships that acted as neural nodes. They reproduced by consuming organic matter and converting it into more ships. They had no civilization, no culture, no purpose, except to spread and consume. "They're like a virus," Taejin said, "but biological." "Yes," Nesson agreed. "We've never encountered anything like them. They violate every principle of life as we understand it." Taejin was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Have you considered using biological weapons against them?" The question made Nesson recoil. Biological weapons, such things are banned by every civilized species. The ethical implications alone would be ethical. Taejin interrupted. "These things are eating your people, entire planets. Where's the ethics in letting them continue?" Nesson struggled to find words. "We are not barbarians, Admiral. We do not fight extinction with extinction, even when it's them or you." The question hung in the air between them. Nesson had no answer. The human's logic was brutal, but undeniable. The Krago were ending the Velian civilization. Why should the Velians limit themselves to civilized warfare when their enemy recognized no such limits? Before Nesson could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. "Contact," the Vaitian tactical officer shouted. "The Krago are breaking through our defensive line. They're heading straight for the evacuation transports." Chin moved to the tactical display immediately. 30 Krago ships had broken away from the main battle, moving with predatory focus toward the civilian vessel struggling to escape Velia Prime's orbit. "Get me Captain Huan," Taejin ordered into his communicator. The response came instantly. "Hey, one here, sir. You have incoming targets bearing 035. 30 hostiles moving toward the civilian transports. Stop them." "Understood. All wings on me. We've got rats in the henhouse." Through the view screen, Nesson watched as the human fighter wings changed course with impossible speed. They dove toward the attacking Kragoth ships like predators themselves, weapons blazing. Captain Huan's fighter led the charge. She had been flying combat missions for 13 hours straight, fueled by stimulants and sheer determination. Her ship was covered in scorch marks from near misses, held together by emergency repairs. But she flew like the devil himself was chasing her. Jawan Kiwan split formation. She ordered. We need to draw them away from the civilians. Make yourselves targets. Making myself a target is my specialty. Pilot Kiwan replied, his fighter breaking left and firing at the nearest Kregoth ship. The Kregoth took the bait. 6 of them peeled off to chase the human fighters. It was exactly what Han wanted. She led them on a deadly dance through the debris field of destroyed ships, using her intimate knowledge of 3-dimensional combat to stay one step ahead. But one Kregoth ship broke through, heading straight for an evacuation transport packed with Vian civilians. Hawan saw it happening and knew she was too far away. Her missiles wouldn't reach in time. She made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. All ships, clear my vector, she ordered, then punched her engines to maximum and aimed her fighter directly at the Krago ship. Captain, what are you doing? J1's voice cracked with panic over the radio. Saving civilians, she replied calmly. Someone fish me out of the wreckage. Her fighter hit the Krago ship at full speed. The impact was catastrophic. Both vessels exploded in a ball of fire. The shockwave pushed the evacuation transport off course, but it survived. On the Vayan command ship, Nessun watched in horror. Did that human just sacrifice herself? She'll probably survive, Taejin said, though his voice was tight with emotion. Our pilots train for worst-case scenarios. The ejection systems are designed for high-impact situations. But she didn't hesitate. Nessun whispered. She just did it. Tizun looked at him with those sharp, dangerous eyes. That's what warriors do. High Curator. We make the hard choices so civilians don't have to die. Moments later, J1's voice came over the radio. I've got her. Captain Huan's escape pod is intact. She's banged up, but breathing. Tin let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Good. Get her back to the medical bay. Nessun watched the human admiral carefully. Despite his cold exterior, there was genuine relief in his eyes. These humans were warriors, yes, brutal and violent and terrifying, but they also cared deeply about their own people. And apparently, they cared about the Villians too. Why? Nessun asked suddenly. Why are you doing this? You don't know us. We're complete strangers. Why risk your lives for us? Tijun was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. Because you asked for help. Because you were dying. Because someone had to answer that call. He paused. And maybe because we're the only ones crazy enough to try. The battle continued to rage around them. But in that moment, Nessun understood something important. The galaxy had called these humans the wrong species, but perhaps they were exactly the right species after all. The battle entered its second day, and both sides had learned to adapt. The Krago swarm, despite being a hive mind, showed an unsettling ability to learn from experience. Ships that had been destroyed by railgun fire were now being replaced by variants with thicker armor. The bioships began moving in more defensive formations, protecting their larger command vessels. But if the Krago could adapt, humans could improvise. Commander Hune sat in the strategy room of the Indomitable, surrounded by holographic displays showing real-time battle data. Around him sat the senior officers, including Captain Huan, who had insisted on returning to duty despite her injuries. Her left arm was in a regenerative cast, and her face was bruised, but her eyes burned with determination. They're learning, Heon said, pointing to the tactical readouts. Every strategy we use, they counter within hours. Their adaptation rate is faster than any enemy we've ever simulated. Then we need to hit them with something they can't adapt to, Admiral Tin replied. What do we know about their command structure? Dr. Sun Ho entered the room, accompanied by a tall Vayan scientist named Ren. Both of them looked exhausted, but excited. Admiral, we found something, Sun Ho said, pulling up biological data. The Krago are controlled by neural nodes, the larger ships we've been seeing. They use bioelectric signals to coordinate the swarm. But here's the interesting part. The frequency range is very specific. If we could disrupt it, we could blind the swarm, Tin finished. Make them lose coordination. Exactly, Ren said through her translator. But creating such a disruption field would require getting very close to a node ship, and they're heavily protected. Haiwan leaned forward, wincing at the pain in her ribs. How close? Within 500 meters, Sung Ho replied. And you'd need to plant a physical device on the ship's hull. The bioelectric signals can't be disrupted from range. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. It was a boarding mission. Someone would have to fly into the heart of the swarm, land on a node ship covered in defensive weapons, and plant the device manually. It was suicide. "I'll do it," Hewan said immediately. "No," Tion replied. "You're injured, and we need you commanding your fighter wings." "Then give me volunteers," she said. "I know a dozen pilots who would take this mission in a heartbeat." Chin looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Pick your team. But hey, Juan, I need you to understand something. This isn't a rescue mission. If you get in trouble out there, we might not be able to pull you out." "I understand, sir." 6 hours later, Captain Hewan stood in the launch bay, addressing a group of 12 pilots. These were the best men and women who had proven themselves in dozens of combat missions. Among them was Pilot Kiwan, grinning despite the danger they were about to face. "All right, listen up," Hewan said. "This is going to be rough. We're going to fly straight into the swarm, land on one of their command ships, plant the device, and get out. The entire fleet will be providing covering fire, but we'll still be outnumbered about 1/3, and to 1. So normal Tuesday," Kiwan joked. A few nervous laughs rippled through the group. Hewan smiled despite herself. "Yeah, normal Tuesday. Remember your training. Watch each other's backs, and if anyone wants to back out, now's the time. No shame in it." No one moved. "Good. Let's go show these things why you don't mess with deathers." The assault shuttle launched from the Indomitable, with an escort of 30 fighters. It was a heavily armored transport designed for exactly this kind of mission, though it had never been tested in actual combat. As they approached the swarm, the full scale of the battle became visible. Thousands of ships engaged in brutal combat, weapons fire lighting up the void, debris floating everywhere. The human fleet had destroyed over 3,000 Kragoth ships, but another 2,000 had arrived as reinforcements. And at the center of it all, protected by hundreds of smaller vessels, was their target. A massive node ship, easily the size of a city, pulsing with sickly green light. "Target acquired," Juan reported. Beginning attack run, the Indomitable and 6 other capital ships opened fire simultaneously, creating a corridor of destruction through the swarm. Krago ships exploded left and right as the assault team pushed through, but the swarm adapted quickly, closing the gap, firing their bow weapons at the intruders. One of the escort fighters took a direct hit and spun out of control. The pilot ejected, but Haiwan knew the chances of rescue were slim. "Stay focused," she ordered. "We're almost there." The node ship loomed before them, a grotesque thing of chiton and pulsing flesh. Its surface was covered in weapon ports and what looked like sensory organs. As the assault shuttle approached, those weapons came alive, firing streams of organic acid and biotany. "Hold on," the pilot shouted, throwing the shuttle into evasive maneuvers. They hit the hull hard, magnetic clamps engaging with a metallic clang. The rear door blew open, and the boarding team poured out, wearing heavy combat suits designed to survive in the vacuum of space. Juan was first out, her rifle already firing at the defensive organisms growing on the ship's surface. They looked like tumors with teeth snapping at anything that came close. "Plant the charges," she ordered. "Kiwan Sumin, secure the perimeter." Dr. Sumin, the military xenobiologist, ran to the optimal position carrying the disruption device. It was a crude thing, built in a hurry from human and technology, but theoretical models suggested it would work. Behind them, the ship's surface began to ripple and change. The Krago were adapting again, growing new defenses specifically to deal with the boarders. "Contact!" Kiwan shouted, firing at something emerging from the hull. It looked like a combination of spider and scorpion, moving with terrifying speed. The team's weapons tore into the creature, but 3 more emerged to replace it. "Suminyan, how long?" Hay demanded, covering the scientist with suppressing fire. 30 seconds. The device needs to integrate with the ship's neural tissue. 30 seconds felt like an eternity. More creatures emerged from the hull, attacking with mindless ferocity. One of the Marines went down, grabbed by a tentacle-like appendage, and dragged into a hole in the ship's surface. His screams cut off abruptly. "Device set," Zumin shouted. "We need to go now." "Everyone back to the shuttle," Juan ordered. They ran across the alien surface, fighting every step. Kiwan provided covering fire, his weapon overheating from continuous use. Another Marine fell, then another. By the time they reached the shuttle, they had lost 4 people. The shuttle lifted off, its engines screaming just as the disruption device activated on the Indomitable. Commander Hun watched his sensors with intense focus. Devices active. Measuring effects now. The results were immediate and dramatic. The Krago ship suddenly lost coordination. They stopped moving in unison, started bumping into each other, firing at random targets. Some even began attacking other Krago ships, unable to distinguish friend from foe. "It's working," Eunice shouted from her station. "The swarm is in chaos." Admiral Chun didn't smile. "All ships, press the attack. Target the node ships. I want every single one of them destroyed before they can adapt." The human fleet surged forward with renewed fury. Without their coordination, the Kragoth were vulnerable. The battle that had been evenly matched suddenly became a slaughter. But Tae-Jin knew this advantage wouldn't last long. The swarm would adapt just like they had adapted to everything else, which meant the humans needed to end this fight quickly and permanently. "Commander Hun," he said quietly, "prepare the cleanser." Hyan's hands froze over his console. "Sir, that weapon is WEP. We've never used it outside of tests. The consequences could be—" "I know exactly what the consequences will be," Tin interrupted. "But the Krago have a home system. As long as it exists, they'll keep coming. We need to remove that threat permanently." "That's genocide, sir." "Yes," Chun agreed, his voice heavy. "It is." The moral weight of the decision hung in the air. But sometimes, Tae-Jun thought, being a warrior meant making choices that would haunt you forever, because the alternative was letting innocent people die. "Prepare the cleanser," he repeated. "We're ending this war." The final battle for Velia Prime lasted 72 hours, and when it was over, the Krago swarm had been completely destroyed. High Curator Nesson stood in the observation deck of his command ship, watching the debris field that had once been an invasion fleet. Thousands of destroyed biohips floated in the void, frozen and lifeless. The human fleet moved among them like sharks, methodically scanning for any survivors and eliminating them without mercy. It should have felt like victory. The Velian people were saved. 6 billion lives had been preserved, but Nesson felt only a cold dread in his hearts. He had watched the humans fight with a brutality that defied his understanding. They had used weapons that his people considered unthinkable: nuclear missiles, antimatter bombs, biological agents designed to cause maximum suffering, and at the end, they had done something even worse. They had destroyed the Krago home system. The weapon was called the Cleanser, Admiral Tae-Jin had explained. It was a device that caused stars to destabilize, go supernova, centuries ahead of schedule. The Krago home system, 3 jumps away from Velia Prime, had been wiped out in an instant. An entire star system gone. It was necessary, Tae-Jin had said, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions. As long as their breeding grounds existed, they would keep coming. This was the only way to ensure your people's safety. But Nesson couldn't shake the horror of it. The humans had committed genocide, complete total absolute extinction of a species, and they had done it without hesitation. A notification chimed on his console. "Hi, Curator. Representatives from the Galactic Council have arrived. They're requesting immediate audience." Nesson felt his blood run cold. The Council, of course, they would come now, after the fighting was done. They had ignored the Veyan distress signals for months. But now that humans had revealed themselves to the galaxy, the Council came running. "Send them in," Nesson said wearily. 3 figures entered the observation deck. They represented different species from across the galaxy, all members of the Galactic Council. Ambassador Trell, a tall insectoid being, spoke first through his translator. "High Curator Nesson, we have been monitoring the situation here. We must speak with these humans immediately. They saved our entire civilization," Nesson replied carefully. "Whatever you have to say to them, remember that." "We understand," Trellith said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But they have committed serious violations of galactic law. The use of nuclear weapons, antimatter devices, and the destruction of an entire star system. These are war crimes of the highest order." Before Nesson could respond, Admiral Tae-Jin entered the observation deck with Dr. Sun Ho and Commander Hun. The human admiral looked tired, his uniform showing signs of 3 days of continuous combat operations, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "I am Ambassador Trellith of the Galactic Council," the insectoid announced. "We need to discuss your actions here." Tae-Jin studied the council representatives with cold assessment. "You're the ones who ignored the Veyan distress signals. We were attempting to organize a diplomatic solution, Trelith replied stiffly. Violence should always be the last resort. The Vians were being eaten alive, Chin said flatly. There was no time for diplomacy. There was only time for action. Nevertheless, your use of forbidden weapons and the genocide of the Krago species must be addressed. You cannot simply enter the galactic community and break every law we have established. We're not part of your galactic community, Commander Hyon interjected. We never signed your treaties. We never agreed to your laws. Trello's translator crackled with what might have been frustration. You are a spacefaring species. That makes you subject to galactic law, whether you acknowledge it or not. Let me understand this correctly, Tin said, his voice dangerously quiet. You're telling me that we should have followed your laws and let the Villians die, that we should have negotiated with a hive mind that only knows how to consume, that we should have fought with one hand tied behind our backs while billions of innocents were being slaughtered. We're saying there are rules for a reason, Trelith insisted. War must be conducted with honor, with restraint. With what? Tijun interrupted. With good manners, with politeness. Tell me, Ambassador, how many species has your council saved from complete extinction? How many times have you arrived in time to actually help? The question hung in the air. Trelith had no answer. Dr. Sunho stepped forward, his voice calmer than the Admiral's. Ambassador, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding. When we received the Villian distress signal, we interpreted it as a call for military intervention. We responded accordingly. If there was a translation error, if they actually wanted diplomatic assistance, then we apologized. But we did what we thought was right. You killed an entire species, Trelith said. How is that right? The Krago weren't like you or me, Sungho replied. They were a biological weapon, a virus in the shape of ships. They had no culture, no civilization, no ability to communicate or compromise. They existed only to consume. Should we have let them continue? Let them spread to other systems? How many more billions would have died? Another council representative, a crystalline being named Vest, spoke up. The Krago were a living species. They had as much right to exist as any other. Captain Huan had been standing quietly near the door, but she couldn't stay silent anymore. They were eating people, children, families, entire worlds. What right to exist does something like that have? All life is sacred, Vest replied. Then why didn't you save the Valians? Huan shot back. Where was your respect for sacred life when they were calling for help? Where were you during the 3 months they fought alone? The council representatives had no answer to that either. High Curator Nesson found himself speaking, surprising even himself. The humans answered our call when no one else would. They fought for us when we had no hope left. Yes, they were brutal. Yes, they used terrible weapons, but they saved 6 billion of my people. That matters more to me than your laws or your philosophy. High Curator, Trelith began. You don't understand what you're saying. These humans are dangerous. They come from a death world. They think like predators. They solve every problem with violence. If we allow them into the galactic community, they will disrupt everything we've built. Good, Nesson said firmly. Perhaps your community needs disruption. You've built a civilization so obsessed with peace and protocol that you forgot how to actually protect people. The humans remembered. Maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needs. Admiral Taejin looked at Nesson with something like respect. Then he turned back to the council representatives. Here's what's going to happen, he said. Earth is going to maintain its military readiness. We're going to continue developing weapons that would make you uncomfortable. And if someone sends out another distress signal, if someone else is dying while you're busy having committee meetings, we're going to respond just like we did here. That's unacceptable, Trelith said. You cannot be allowed to operate independently of galactic law. Then make it acceptable, Taejin replied. Because we're not asking for permission. The standoff might have continued, but Enin Mera rushed into the observation deck, her face pale. Admiral, we're receiving another distress signal. Different sector, different species. They're under attack by something called the Vex Collective. Same pattern as the Krago. Consumption, no communication, massive casualties. Tijun looked at the council representatives. Well, are you going to handle this one, or should we? Tuleth looked at his fellow council members, then back at the human admiral. He seemed to deflate slightly. How quickly can your fleet be ready to deploy? He asked quietly. 18 hours, Tujun replied. Just like last time. Then perhaps. Trelith said slowly. We should discuss Earth's integration into the galactic community under special circumstances, with certain allowances for your unique approach to crisis response. You mean you want us to be your attack dogs? Commander Hun said bluntly. We prefer the term emergency response force, Fest said diplomatically. Chin smiled grimly. Call it whatever you want, but understand this. When we respond to a threat, we respond our way. No restrictions, no limitations, no committee oversight. We decide how to fight our battles. If you can't accept that, find someone else. The council representatives looked at each other. They had no one else. The entire galaxy had developed under the assumption that peace was the natural state of things, that violence could always be negotiated away. The humans had proven that assumption wrong. We accept your terms, Trelith said finally. Welcome to the Galactic Council, humanity. May the universe forgive us all. As the council representatives left, High Curator Nesson approached Admiral Chin. Thank you, he said simply. For everything, Chin nodded. We did what needed to be done. I'm sorry it had to be so violent. I'm not, Nesson replied, surprising himself again. You showed the galaxy that there are still species willing to fight for others. That matters. Just don't send us any more distress signals, Taejin said with a tired smile. We need time to repair our ships. But even as he said it, they both knew the truth. The galaxy had learned about humanity. Now word would spread.